When Earth dogs bonded with alien species, the whole galaxy wanted pets. The Galactic Council had seen many things in its 10,000 years of existence. They had witnessed the rise and fall of empires. They had watched stars die and new worlds form. They had cataloged over 50,000 intelligent species across the known universe, but nothing had prepared them for what the humans brought with them when they finally joined the galactic community. Ambassador Xylax of the Valorian Empire stood at the docking bay of Station Prime, watching the human vessel approach. His tall, slender frame cast a long shadow across the polished floor. His species had evolved on a world of perpetual twilight, and their large eyes could see in almost complete darkness. Those eyes now focused on the strange ship that was about to dock. The humans had only achieved faster-than-light travel 50 years ago. They were young. They were primitive by galactic standards, but they had something that made them unique among all the species the Council had encountered. They had formed a bond with another species on their world, not a symbiotic relationship for survival, not a predator-prey dynamic, something else entirely. The airlock hissed open, and the human delegation stepped through. There were 5 of them, dressed in simple uniforms, but it was not the humans that caught Xylax's attention. It was the 4-legged creature that walked beside them. The animal was covered in golden fur. It had a long snout and floppy ears. Its tail moved back and forth with excitement as it took in the new surroundings. When its eyes met Xylax's, something strange happened. The creature's tail moved even faster, and it made a sound that the translator in Xylax's ear rendered as pure joy. "What is that?" Xylax asked, unable to hide his curiosity. The lead human smiled. Her name was Sarah Chen, and she was Earth's first official ambassador to the Galactic Council. "This is Max," she said. "He's a dog, a golden retriever to be specific." "A dog," Xylax repeated. The word felt strange on his tongue. "And what is its function? Is it a guard animal, a food source, a beast of burden?" Sarah laughed, and the sound was warm. "None of those things, Ambassador. Max is my friend, my companion, my family." Xylax's large eyes blinked in confusion. "I do not understand. You brought a non-intelligent animal to this diplomatic meeting because it is your friend." "That's right," Sarah said. She knelt down and scratched behind Max's ears. The dog leaned into her touch, his eyes closing in contentment. "Humans and dogs have been together for over 15,000 years. They evolved alongside us. They understand us in ways that no other species can." The other members of the council delegation had gathered now. There was Krex from the Insectoid Collective, their mandibles clicking in curiosity. There was the floating sphere of light that was Ambassador Prism from the energy beings of Sector 7. There was the massive, rock-like form of Granite, representative of the Silicon people. They all stared at the dog. Max, for his part, seemed completely unbothered by the attention. He sniffed the air, taking in all the new smells. Then, without warning, he walked straight up to Xylax and sat down at his feet. The dog looked up at the Valorian and made a small sound. "He wants you to pet him," Sarah explained. "Pet him?" "Touch him, stroke his fur. Dogs like physical contact. It makes them happy." Xylax looked down at the creature. Its tail was still moving, sweeping across the floor in a steady rhythm. Its eyes were bright and trusting. There was no fear in them, no aggression, no calculation. Just pure, simple happiness at meeting someone new. Slowly, carefully, Xylax extended one of his long fingers and touched the top of Max's head. The fur was softer than anything he had ever felt, and the reaction from the dog was immediate. Max leaned into the touch, his eyes closing, his whole body relaxing. Something stirred in Xylax's chest. It was a feeling he had never experienced before, a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. "Fascinating," he whispered. The diplomatic meetings went on for 3 days. They discussed trade agreements and territorial boundaries. They talked about technology sharing and cultural exchange. But through it all, the council members kept finding excuses to visit the human quarters. They wanted to see Max. Krex discovered that Max loved to chase things. The insectoid spent an entire afternoon throwing a ball across the room, watching in amazement as Max retrieved it again and again, never seeming to tire of the game. Granite found that Max would fall asleep against his rocky form. The silicon person's natural warmth was apparently very comfortable for the dog. For the first time in centuries, Granite felt something other than cold logic. He felt needed. Even Prism, who had no physical form, found a way to connect with Max. The dog would track the energy being's movements with his eyes, and Prism discovered that by pulsing their light in certain patterns, they could make Max's tail wag. But it was Xylax who formed the strongest bond. Every evening after the formal meetings ended, he would visit the human quarters. Max would greet him at the door, tail wagging, body wiggling with excitement. They would sit together in the observation lounge, watching the stars. Xylax would stroke Max's fur, and the dog would rest his head on the Valorian's lap. "Why does he like me?" Xylax asked Sarah one night. "I am not human. I am not even similar to humans, yet he acts as if I am his oldest friend." Sarah smiled. "That's what dogs do. They don't see species or appearance. They see hearts. They see souls. They sense who you really are underneath everything else." "That is remarkable." 15,000 years of evolution, Sarah said. Dogs and humans grew up together. They learned to read us. They learned to love us. And in return, we learned to be better, kinder, more compassionate. Having a creature that loves you unconditionally changes you. Xylax looked down at Max. The dog's eyes met his, and in that moment the Valorian understood something profound. This was not just an animal. This was a bridge, a connection between species, a reminder that in all the vastness of the universe, the most powerful force was not technology or military might. It was love. "I want one," Xylax said softly. Sarah's eyes widened. "What?" "A dog. I want one of my own. Is that possible?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, then she smiled. "Let me make some calls." Word spread quickly through the Galactic Council. The Valorian ambassador wanted a dog. The news was met with confusion, then curiosity, then a flood of similar requests. Within a week, every species represented on Station Prime had submitted formal inquiries about obtaining their own Earth dogs. Humanity had just found its most valuable export, and the galaxy would never be the same. 6 months after the first diplomatic mission, the Galactic Dog Distribution Program was officially established. It was, by all accounts, the strangest initiative in the history of interspecies relations, and it was about to change everything. Dr. Marcus Webb stood in the breeding facility on New Houston Station, surrounded by puppies. There were golden retrievers and Labrador retrievers. There were German shepherds and border collies. There were beagles and poodles and mixed breeds of every variety. All of them were bred specifically for placement with alien families. "We have 300 requests this month alone," his assistant told him. "The Valorians want 20 more retrievers. The Silicon people are asking for breeds that can handle extreme temperatures, and the Aquatic Confederacy is wondering if we have any water-loving dogs." Marcus rubbed his temples. The Aquatic Confederacy, they live underwater. They have surface platforms for diplomatic purposes. They want dogs for those facilities. "Of course they do." Marcus looked out at the sea of wagging tails. "Everyone wants a dog now." The program had started small. Xylax had been given a golden retriever puppy named Saul, and the bond between them had been immediate. Images of the tall, gray-skinned Valorian walking through the corridors of Station Prime with a bouncing golden puppy at his side had spread across the galactic networks. Within days, it was the most shared content in recorded history. Other species watched and wondered. What was this strange magic? How could a simple Earth animal bring such joy to an alien ambassador? They had to find out for themselves. The first wave of requests came from species similar to humans, bipedal oxygen breathers with comparable environments. These were easy to accommodate. Earth dogs adapted well to their worlds and the bonds formed quickly. Ambassador Krex of the Insectoid Collective was among the first non-humanoid recipients. The skeptics said it would never work. Dogs had evolved to read human facial expressions and body language. How could they possibly bond with a being who had compound eyes and mandibles instead of a mouth? They underestimated dogs. Krex was given a border collie named Dart. The first meeting was awkward. Dart circled the insectoid cautiously, sniffing at the chitinous exterior. Krex stood perfectly still, unsure of what to do. Then Dart sat down and tilted his head. His tail gave one tentative wag. Krex's mandibles clicked in what the translator rendered as surprise. "It is, looking at me, studying me." Border collies are incredibly intelligent, the handler explained. They're used to herding sheep back on Earth. They're very good at reading behavior and body language, even across species. Dart suddenly barked once and bounded in a circle around Krex. Then he returned to his sitting position, tail wagging faster now. "What does it want?" Krex asked. "I think he wants to play." Over the following weeks, Krex and Dart became inseparable. The border collie learned to read the insectoid's body language with remarkable accuracy. He could tell when Krex was stressed by the subtle tension in their thorax. He knew when Krex was happy by the way their antennae moved, and Dart found ways to communicate back. A specific bark meant he wanted to play. A gentle nudge against Krex's leg meant he wanted affection. A particular whine meant it was time for food. The Insectoid Collective, which had always been known for its cold logic and hive mind efficiency, began to change. Krex reported feeling things they had never felt before. Individual emotions, personal connections. The concept of a pet, a companion that existed solely for the joy of companionship, was revolutionary to their society. They requested more dogs, many more. The Silicon people presented unique challenges. Their bodies were made of living rock, and their surface temperature averaged around 200 degrees Fahrenheit. No Earth dog could survive direct contact with them for long. But humans were nothing if not creative problem solvers. Dr. Webb's team developed specialized cooling suits for the dogs. The suits regulated their body temperature and protected them from the heat of their silicon companions. They also developed special toys and enrichment activities that could withstand high temperatures. Granite, the silicon representative who had first bonded with Max, was given a Great Pyrenees named Mountain. The large, fluffy white dog wore his cooling suit with dignity. He quickly learned that he could lean against Granite without discomfort, and the silicon person discovered that having a living creature choose to be near them was profoundly moving. "For 3,000 years, no organic being has willingly touched me," Granite said in their deep, rumbling voice. "They fear the heat, they keep their distance, but this dog, this mountain, he seeks my presence. He finds comfort in my warmth." The image of the massive rock being cradling a fluffy white dog became another galactic sensation. The Silicon people, who had always been viewed as cold and unapproachable, were suddenly seen in a new light. They could love, they could be gentle, they could be friends. The energy beings of Sector 7 presented the greatest challenge of all. They had no physical form. They were pure light and consciousness. How could they possibly have a pet? The answer came from an unexpected source. A young human engineer named Jun discovered that certain dogs were particularly sensitive to electromagnetic fields. They could sense the presence of the energy beings and track their movements. With training, these dogs could interact with the light entities in meaningful ways. Ambassador Prism was given a small mixed-breed dog named Spark. The dog had been specially trained to respond to light patterns. When Prism pulsed in certain ways, Spark would perform specific behaviors. A gentle glow meant treats were coming. A rapid flash meant playtime. A soft, steady light meant rest. But the true breakthrough came when Spark began initiating communication. The dog learned to bark in patterns that Prism could understand. A short bark followed by a long pause meant Spark wanted attention. A series of quick barks meant excitement. A low, sustained bark meant something was wrong. For the first time in their existence, the energy beings had a direct, personal connection with a physical creature. Prism described the experience as transformative. "We have always observed the physical universe from a distance," Prism explained. "We have studied it, cataloged it, analyzed it, but we have never been part of it. This small creature has changed that. When Spark looks at me, when he wags his tail at my approach, I feel connected to the material world in a way I never have before. I feel real." The program expanded rapidly. More breeding facilities were established. Training programs were developed for different species. Specialized equipment was designed for extreme environments. The demand seemed endless. But it was not just about the dogs. It was about what the dogs represented. They were ambassadors in their own right. They crossed boundaries that diplomats could not. They formed bonds that treaties could not mandate. They brought species together in ways that centuries of formal relations had failed to achieve. The Valorian Human Trade Agreement, which had been stalled for months over minor disputes, was finalized within a week of Xylax receiving Saul. The ambassador was in too good a mood to argue over trivial matters. The long-standing tension between the Insectoid Collective and the Silicon people evaporated when Krex and Granite discovered they both had dogs. They began meeting regularly to let their pets play together, and the political relationship warmed accordingly. Even the mysterious energy beings, who had always kept themselves separate from galactic affairs, became more engaged. Prism began attending council meetings in person, Spark's pattern recognition collar allowing the dog to accompany them. Humanity, which had been viewed as a young and insignificant species, was suddenly at the center of galactic attention. Every species wanted their dogs. Every species wanted to know their secret. And the secret, as it turned out, was simple: love. Unconditional, uncomplicated, unwavering love. Dr. Webb watched as another batch of puppies was loaded onto a transport ship bound for the outer reaches. Each puppy had been carefully matched with a species and an individual. Each would become an ambassador of Earth, spreading joy across the stars. "Do you ever worry," his assistant asked, "about sending them so far away?" Marcus smiled. "Dogs have always gone where humans go. Now they're going where humans can't, but they'll be okay. They're good at making friends." The ship launched, carrying its precious cargo toward distant worlds. And across the galaxy, alien beings waited eagerly for their new companions. The universe was about to discover what humans had known for 15,000 years. Everyone needs a dog. The Great Galactic Pet Expo was held on the neutral world of Harmony Prime 3 years after the first dog was given to Ambassador Xylax. What began as a small gathering to share experiences had grown into the largest interspecies event in galactic history. Over 5,000 species attended, and nearly all of them brought their dogs. Elder Carix of the Methane Breathers guided their massive, slug-like body through the entrance hall. Beside them, encased in a specialized environmental suit, trotted a small beagle named Sniff. The suit allowed Sniff to breathe oxygen while surrounded by the methane atmosphere that Carix required. Through the clear helmet, Sniff's nose worked constantly, processing the strange new smells. "Is it not uncomfortable for the creature?" asked a passing delegate. Carix's body rippled in what the translator identified as amusement. "Sniff has worn this suit since he was a puppy. It is as natural to him as your own skin. Watch." The beagle suddenly stopped, his body going rigid. His nose pointed toward a distant corner of the hall. Then, without warning, he began pulling at his leash, dragging the massive elder behind him. "He has found something," Carix explained, allowing themselves to be led. "This is his gift. He finds things, lost objects, hidden treats. Once he found a crack in our atmospheric dome before our sensors detected it. He saved our entire colony." They arrived at the corner to find another dog, a large German shepherd with its own companion, a spindly being made entirely of crystalline structures. The two dogs sniffed each other in greeting, tails wagging. "Your beagle has excellent instincts," the crystalline being said. "My Kaiser sensed your approach from across the hall. He wanted to meet the other dog." "It seems our companions have decided to be friends," Carix observed. "Perhaps we should follow their example. I am Elder Carix of the Methane Collective." "I am Prismus of the Crystal Kingdoms. It is good to meet you." The two beings, who had never interacted before and whose species had no diplomatic relations, began talking. Their dogs sat between them, occasionally nudging each other or sharing sniffs. By the end of the conversation, a preliminary trade agreement had been outlined. This scene repeated throughout the expo. Dogs brought their companions together. They broke down barriers. They created connections. In the main auditorium, Ambassador Sarah Chen took the stage. Max, now 7 years old with a distinguished gray muzzle, walked beside her. He had attended every major diplomatic event since that first meeting on Station Prime. He was, perhaps, the most famous dog in the galaxy. "3 years ago," Sarah began, "we brought dogs to the stars. We didn't know what would happen. We only knew that these creatures had been our partners for thousands of years, and we wanted to share that partnership with our new galactic neighbors." She looked out at the audience. There were beings of every shape and size, silicon creatures and energy beings, insectoids and aquatic species in water-filled suits, and beside almost every one of them was a dog. What we discovered was something profound. Dogs don't care what you look like. They don't care where you come from. They don't care if you're made of flesh or rock or light. They only care about one thing: connection, love, the simple joy of being with someone who cares about them. Max lay down at her feet, his tail thumping against the stage. "We humans have a saying: we don't deserve dogs, they're too good for us, too pure, too loving, but maybe that's exactly why they're so important. They remind us of what we should be. They show us what we could become if we just loved each other a little more." The audience was silent. Then slowly a sound began to build. It was different for each species. Clicks and whistles and hums and glows, but the translation was universal. Applause. After the speech, there were demonstrations. Training techniques were shared. Health protocols were discussed. New breeds were introduced that had been specifically developed for certain species. The water dogs were a particular sensation. These dogs had been genetically modified to breathe underwater for extended periods. They had webbed feet and streamlined bodies, and they loved to swim. The Aquatic Confederacy had been working with human scientists for 2 years on this project. Now, finally, they could introduce their results. A large tank was brought onto the demonstration floor. Inside, a group of the aquatic beings swam in lazy circles. Then, a hatch opened, and a dozen water dogs dove into the tank. The audience gasped as the dogs swam alongside their aquatic companions. They played fetch with special sinking toys. They performed underwater tricks. They even learned to communicate through a series of bubbles and body movements. "We never understood the appeal of pets," the aquatic ambassador explained. "Our species has no concept of companionship for its own sake. Every relationship has a purpose, a function. But these dogs, they have taught us that the purpose can simply be joy. The function can be love." A water dog swam up to the glass and pressed its nose against it, looking at the crowd with bright, curious eyes. Several audience members reached out to touch the glass in response. But not everything at the expo was celebration. In a smaller meeting room, away from the main events, a serious discussion was taking place. Representatives from Earth's dog distribution program met with officials from dozens of species to address growing concerns. The black market is expanding, reported Agent Vex of the Galactic Enforcement Division. Unlicensed breeders are producing dogs without proper genetic screening. They're being sold to species who haven't been vetted for compatibility. We've had incidents. What kind of incidents? Sarah asked. 3 deaths in the past month. 2 dogs and 1 companion. A Valorian purchased a dog from an unlicensed source. The dog hadn't been properly trained and panicked during a thunderstorm equivalent on their world. It bit the Valorian, and the Valorian, not understanding dog behavior, reacted violently. The dog died. The Valorian was so distraught that they took their own life. And the 3rd death was a dog that was sold to a species with incompatible atmospheric needs. The poor creature suffocated within hours. The room fell silent. "We need better regulation," said Dr. Webb. "Every dog that leaves Earth needs to be tracked. Every companion species needs to be educated. This program only works if it's done right." "The demand is too high," another representative argued. "We can't meet it through official channels. That's why the black market exists." "Then we need to expand official channels," Sarah said firmly. "We need more breeding facilities, more training programs, more education initiatives. If we let the black market take over, everything we've built will fall apart." The discussion continued for hours. Policies were drafted. Resources were allocated. It was not glamorous work, but it was necessary. Meanwhile, in the main hall, something wonderful was happening. A young Valorian child had wandered away from their parents. They were small and scared, lost in a sea of giant beings they didn't recognize. Tears streamed down their gray face. Then a dog found them. It was a golden retriever, one of the expo's therapy dogs trained to help anxious visitors. The dog approached the child slowly, tail wagging gently. It sat down in front of them and looked up with warm, understanding eyes. The child stopped crying. They reached out and touched the dog's soft fur. The dog leaned into the touch, and the child smiled. "Don't worry," the dog's handler said, approaching carefully. "We'll find your parents, but until then, would you like to pet Sunshine?" The child nodded, already relaxing. The dog's presence was calming them in a way that no words could. This was the true power of the program. Not trade agreements or diplomatic relations, but moments like this. Small acts of kindness. Simple connections between beings who had nothing in common except the need for comfort and love. By the end of the expo, several things had been accomplished. New regulations were put in place to combat the black market. A galactic dog registry was established to track every dog in space. And most importantly, the bonds between species had grown stronger. As the delegates prepared to leave Harmony Prime, many of them paused to take pictures with their dogs. These images would be shared across the galaxy, inspiring others, showing what was possible when different beings came together. Sarah Chen stood at the observation window, watching the ships depart. Max sat beside her, his graying muzzle resting on her knee. "You started something big, old friend," she said softly, scratching behind his ears. Max's tail wagged slowly. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. He was loved. He was happy. That was all that mattered. And across the galaxy, millions of dogs were spreading that same message. Love, happiness, connection. The universe would never be the same. 10 years had passed since the first dog crossed the stars. What had begun as a simple gift to Ambassador Xylax had grown into a movement that transformed galactic civilization. Dogs lived on over 3,000 worlds now, companions to beings that humanity had never imagined could form such bonds. Ambassador Xylax, now Elder Xylax of the Valorian High Council, walked through the memorial garden on Station Prime. Beside him walked Luna, a young golden retriever just 2 years old, but his heart was heavy with memory. Saul had died 3 years ago. The golden retriever who had been his first companion had lived a full and happy life. 12 years of love, of joy, of friendship that transcended species. When Saul passed, Xylax had wept. It was the first time any Valorian had publicly shown such emotion. The funeral had been broadcast across the galaxy. Millions had watched as the tall, gray-skinned elder cradled the body of his beloved dog. The image became a symbol of the program, proof that the bonds formed between dogs and aliens were real, deep, and profound. "Luna is not Saul," Xylax said softly to his walking companion, a human named James who worked at the memorial garden. "She never will be, but she is her own creature with her own spirit, and I love her for who she is." Luna wagged her tail at the sound of her name. She didn't know she was filling the pawprints of a legend. She only knew that she loved the tall gray being who fed her and played with her and held her when storms shook the station. The memorial garden was filled with statues now. Each one honored a dog who had served with distinction across the stars. There was Dart, the border collie who had helped the Insected Collective discover individual emotion. There was Mountain, the Great Pyrenees who had shown the Silicon people that they could be loved. There was Spark, the small mixed breed who had bridged the gap between physical and energy beings. And there at the center of the garden was the largest statue of all, Max. Sarah Chen's beloved golden retriever had passed 2 years ago. He had lived to the remarkable age of 17, his final years spent as the most famous dog in galactic history. The statue showed him as he had been in his prime, tail wagging, eyes bright with joy. Sarah visited the statue every day. She was older now, her hair gray, her steps slower, but she still came, she still remembered. "He would have loved this," she said, touching the stone paw. "All of it, the garden, the statues, the legacy. He always loved meeting new beings. Every species was just another friend he hadn't made yet." James nodded. He was the great-grandson of Dr. Marcus Webb, who had established the breeding program so many years ago. The family had dedicated themselves to the Dogs Across Stars program ever since. "The numbers came in this morning," James said. "There are now over 50 million dogs living off Earth. They're on 3,217 worlds. They're companions to over 40,000 different species." Sarah smiled. 50 million. When I brought Max to Station Prime, I never imagined this. I just wanted to show them what a friend looked like. "You changed everything, Ambassador." "Not me, Max, dogs. They're the ones who changed everything. All I did was bring them here." Across the galaxy, the changes were profound. The Insectoid Collective, once known for its cold efficiency, had developed a thriving emotional culture. Individual feelings were no longer suppressed but celebrated. The hive mind still existed, but it was enriched now by the personal experiences of each member. The border collies that lived among them had taught them that efficiency and emotion could coexist. The Silicon people had become the galaxy's most sought-after diplomats. Their natural patience, combined with the warmth they had learned from their dogs, made them ideal negotiators. Beings who had once been feared for their alien nature were now beloved for their gentle spirits. The energy beings of Sector 7 had emerged from their self-imposed isolation. They attended council meetings regularly now. They formed friendships with physical species. They had even begun experimenting with temporary physical forms, curious to experience the universe in new ways. Their dogs had shown them that consciousness was not limited by form. And the Aquatic Confederacy had undergone the most dramatic transformation of all. The water-loving dogs had become a symbol of their society, and the concept of companionship had revolutionized their culture. They had developed art, music, and literature for the first time in their history, all inspired by the joy of having pets. But there were challenges too. The black market had never been fully eliminated. Despite strict regulations, Unlicensed breeders continued to operate in the shadows. Some of the dogs they produced were healthy and happy, but others were not. Horror stories emerged of dogs abandoned on incompatible worlds, of creatures bred without proper care, of bonds broken before they could form. The Dog Protection Agency had been established to combat these problems. Agents like James's sister, Alina, traveled the galaxy rescuing abused and abandoned dogs, shutting down illegal operations, and educating species about responsible pet ownership. "We saved 12 dogs last week," Alina reported during a family dinner. They were being kept in terrible conditions on a mining station in the outer reaches. The species there had good intentions, but they didn't understand what dogs needed. They were feeding them metal shavings, thinking it was food. "What happened to them?" James asked. "We found them new homes, species that were properly educated, but it shouldn't have happened in the first place." This was the ongoing struggle. Demand for dogs continued to outpace supply. The black market filled the gap, often with devastating consequences. The official program did its best, but there was only so much they could do. And then there was the question of other pets. The council received a formal request yesterday, Elder Xylax announced at a diplomatic meeting. The crystalline kingdoms want to know if Earth has other companion animals. They find dogs too energetic. They want something calmer. Sarah exchanged a look with James. "Cats," she said simply. "Cats. Earth cats. They're another species that bonded with humans, though the relationship is different. Cats are more independent, more mysterious. Some humans say that dogs have masters, but cats have staff." Xylax's large eyes blinked. "I do not understand." "You'll see," Sarah smiled. "We've actually been developing a cat program for the past few years. We wanted to make sure we got it right before introducing them to the galaxy." The Galactic Cat Introduction Program launched 6 months later. The results were mixed. Cats, it turned out, were not as universally adaptable as dogs. They were more particular about their companions, more selective about their environments. Some species bonded with them beautifully. The crystalline kingdoms adored their cats, finding the creature's independent nature perfectly suited to their own culture. The energy beings were fascinated by cats' ability to seem to look right through them. But other species struggled. The insectoids found cats' unpredictable nature confusing. The Silicon people's heat was uncomfortable for the temperature-sensitive felines, and the Aquatic Confederacy quickly learned that most cats hated water. Still, the program expanded. Cats found their homes across the stars, and then came the others. Rabbits for the gentle meadow people, birds for the flying avian collective, even fish for species who wanted companions but couldn't accommodate air-breathing creatures. Earth, the young primitive world, had become the pet capital of the galaxy. But through it all, dogs remained the most beloved. They had been first. They had proven that such bonds were possible. They had changed everything. On the anniversary of Max's death, a ceremony was held at the Memorial Garden. Thousands of beings attended from across the galaxy. They brought their dogs. They brought their cats. They brought their birds and rabbits and fish. They came to honor the creature who had started it all. Sarah Chen, 92 years old now, stood at the podium. Luna the golden retriever sat beside her, a descendant of Max's bloodline. 50 years ago, Sarah said, her voice still strong, I brought a dog to meet some aliens. I didn't know what would happen. I only knew that Max had something to share, something that transcended language and culture and species. I was right. She looked out at the crowd, at the Velorians with their retrievers, at the insectoids with their border collies, at the Silicon people with their Great Pyrenees, at the energy beings with their mixed breeds. Dogs taught us that love has no boundaries. They showed us that friendship can exist between any beings, no matter how different. They proved that the universe is not cold and empty, but warm and full of connection. Luna stood up and pressed against Sarah's leg. The old woman smiled and scratched behind her ears. This is our gift to the galaxy. Not technology, not resources, not military might, just love. Simple, unconditional, unwavering love. The kind that dogs have given us for 15,000 years. She stepped back from the podium, and the audience erupted in appreciation. Every species had their own way of showing approval, and the sound was like nothing heard before in the history of the universe. In that moment, looking out at a galaxy united by the simplest of things, Sarah knew that humanity had found its place among the stars. Not as conquerors, not as traders, not as warriors, but as the people who taught the universe how to love. And it had all started with one dog, one tail wag, and one simple question. Do you want to pet him? 100 years after Max first stepped onto Station Prime, the galaxy gathered for a celebration unlike any other. The Centennial Festival of Companionship was held on Earth itself, the first time most alien species had visited humanity's homeworld. The descendants of the original diplomatic delegation were there. Xylax's great-grandchild, Elder Velora, stood in the fields of Montana with a golden retriever named Star at her side. The insectoid representative, Krek 7, carried the memory patterns of the original Kreks, and their border collie, Dash, was from the same breeding line as Dart. Even the energy being known as Prism Child attended, their essence containing fragments of the original Prism who had first bonded with Spark. But the guest of honor was not an alien, it was a dog. Luna the 14th was the direct descendant of Max, bred specifically to maintain the genetic legacy of the dog who had changed everything. She was 6 years old, with the same golden fur and warm eyes as her famous ancestor. She had lived her whole life preparing for this day. The festival was held in a massive natural amphitheater, carved into the mountains of Colorado. Millions of beings attended in person, and trillions more watched through the galactic broadcast network. Dogs of every breed were present, along with cats and birds and rabbits and every other Earth pet that had found homes among the stars. Earth's current ambassador to the Galactic Council, James Chenweb III, took the stage. He was the great-great-grandson of both Sarah Chen and Marcus Webb. His family lines merged through marriage decades ago. Luna the 14th walked beside him. 100 years ago, James began, my great-great-grandmother brought a dog to meet some aliens. She didn't know she was starting a revolution. She just knew that her friend Max deserved to see the stars. The audience was silent, waiting. Since then, dogs have spread to every corner of the galaxy. They live on frozen worlds and burning ones. They swim in alien oceans and bound across low-gravity moons. They have been companions to species that breathe methane and species made of pure light. And everywhere they go, they bring the same gift: love. He paused, looking out at the crowd. But we almost lost this. We almost let it slip away. The mood shifted. This was the part of the celebration that many had dreaded. 20 years ago, the black market nearly destroyed everything we had built. Unlicensed breeders were producing thousands of dogs without proper care or screening. They were being sold to species who didn't understand their needs. Dogs were suffering. Bonds were breaking. The dream was dying. Images appeared on massive screens throughout the amphitheater. Dogs in terrible conditions. Species grieving over companions who had died from neglect or incompatibility. The dark side of the pet revolution. We came together then, every species that had ever loved a dog. We formed the Coalition of Companions. We dedicated resources and personnel to enforcement and education. We shut down the black markets. We rescued the abandoned. We rebuilt trust. The images changed, dogs being saved, species learning proper care, new, stronger bonds forming. It took 10 years, but we did it. The black market still exists in some corners of the galaxy, but it is small and shrinking. The official program is stronger than ever, And most importantly, the dogs are healthy, happy, and loved. James knelt down and put his arm around Luna. The dog licked his face, and the audience made sounds of appreciation. This is Luna the 14th. She is the direct descendant of Max, the dog who started everything. In her blood is the legacy of 100 years of interspecies friendship, and today she will help us celebrate that legacy. The ceremony that followed was elaborate and beautiful. Representatives from each major species came forward to share stories of how dogs had changed their civilizations. The Valorians spoke of emotional awakening. The insectoids described the discovery of individual identity. The silicon people talked about learning to be gentle. The energy beings explained how dogs had helped them connect to the physical universe. But the most moving moment came from an unexpected source. A new species had recently joined the galactic community. The Shadowlings were beings of darkness, living in the void between stars. They had always been feared, their nature so alien that communication seemed impossible. When they first requested a dog, many thought it would never work. But one young human trainer, Alina Chenweb, James's grandmother, had taken on the challenge. She had worked with the Shadowlings for 2 years, learning their ways, understanding their needs, and finally she had found a dog who could bridge the gap. Void was a black Labrador retriever with an unusual trait. He could see in perfect darkness. His eyes had been modified through careful breeding, not genetic engineering, to function like the eyes of deep-sea fish. In the complete absence of light, Void could navigate as easily as any other dog in daylight. The Shadowling representative emerged from a portal of absolute darkness. It was impossible to see their form, only the absence of light where they existed. And beside them, tail wagging, was Void. We did not understand why other species valued these creatures. The Shadowling's voice emerged from the darkness, translated by specialized equipment. We do not feel what you feel. We do not see what you see. We exist in the spaces between stars and the darkness that others fear. We thought ourselves forever alone. Void pressed against the darkness, his tail wagging faster. Then this creature came to us. He was not afraid of our darkness. He did not flinch from our nature. He simply existed beside us, asking nothing but companionship. And in his presence, we understood something we had never understood before. The darkness seemed to pulse. We understood that loneliness is not natural, that even beings like us, who exist outside your perception of reality, can form connections, can feel something that might be called love. The audience was completely still. This dog taught us that we are not alone, that the universe is not empty, that even in the deepest darkness there is always room for a friend. Void barked once, a sound that echoed through the amphitheater. The Shadowling's darkness rippled in what everyone present understood as laughter. Thank you for sharing this gift with us. We were shadows before, now we are companions. The Shadowling retreated through their portal, Void trotting happily beside them. And in that moment, everything the Dogs Across Stars program had ever hoped to achieve was realized. Every species, no matter how alien, no matter how different, could find connection, could find love, could find a friend. The ceremony concluded with a massive gathering in the fields below the amphitheater. Thousands of dogs ran and played together, their alien companions watching with joy. Luna the 14th bounded among them, her golden fur bright in the earth's sunlight, her tail never stopping its wag. James watched from a hillside, surrounded by his family. His grandmother, Alina, now in her 90s, sat in a hoverchair beside him. His parents stood nearby with their own dogs. His children and grandchildren ran in the fields below, playing with dogs and aliens alike. "Grandmother," James said, "do you think they would be proud? Max and Sarah and all the others who started this." Alina smiled. Her eyes were dim now, but she could still see the golden blur of Luna running through the grass. "I met Max once," she said. "I was just a little girl. He was old then, gray and slow, but he walked up to me and put his head in my lap, and he looked at me with those warm brown eyes, and I knew even then that he understood something important. What was that? Alina reached out and took James's hand. That love is simple, that kindness is easy, that all any of us really wants is someone to be happy we exist. She gestured at the scene below. Dogs and aliens, humans and creatures of light, beings of darkness and beings of crystal, all of them playing, all of them happy, all of them together. This is what he wanted. This is what all the dogs wanted. Not glory or fame or recognition, just this. Everyone being happy, everyone being loved. James thought about that for a long moment. Then he whistled, and Luna came bounding up the hill, her tongue lolling, her eyes bright. She crashed into him with her usual enthusiasm, and he laughed as she covered his face with kisses. "Good girl," he said, "good girl." And across the galaxy, on 3,217 worlds, the descendants of Earth's dogs heard similar words. They wagged their tails. They licked their companions' faces. They curled up beside beings made of rock and light and darkness and crystal. They did what dogs had always done. They loved. The universe was vast and cold and full of dangers, but it was also full of warmth, full of connection, full of the simple joy of having a friend. And that, perhaps, was humanity's greatest gift to the stars. Not ships or weapons or technology. Just dogs. Just love. Just the simple truth that everyone deserves a companion, and that the best companions don't care what you look like or where you come from or what you're made of. They just care that you're there, and that you're happy, and that you need someone to love you.